Times and USA Today bestselling author JoAnn Ross. She is the author of over 100 novels published in 27 countries. JoAnn's a member of the Romance Writers of America's Honor Roll of Best-Selling Authors. She has won several awards, including Romantic Times Career Achievement Award for Contemporary Romance. Her latest release, The Inheritance, is a generational saga full of sisterly affection and rivalry with a dramatic World War II love story woven throughout. It is JoAnn's first novel of women's fiction and recommended for fans of Susan Wiggs, Mary Alice Monroe, and Lisa Wingate. JoAnn lives with her husband and rescued Siamese cat, who pretty much rules the house in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm pretty sure JoAnn is, I don't want to ruin the surprise here, but I think she's going to give us a little firsthand insight into what it's like to live in the Northwest. So I'm excited for that. JoAnn, thank you so much for being here today.
It's wonderful. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, take it away.
Okay, it's wonderful to be here. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to be looking like maybe I'm looking outside past you, but I'm really looking at you all. I made the mistake of upgrading my computer last night, and it refuses to acknowledge that I exist. So I'm using my iPad, which has a backwards camera. So I'm looking straight at you, but it doesn't look like it. But I really, truly am. All right, I'm really pleased to be here. Before I start, I want to say how much I love libraries. I grew up in Oregon ranching country, and we were way outside town. We had a county library and a city library, but we were too far out. So every 2 weeks, the bookmobile would come out to our country crossroads. And that was the biggest day of my month. I would go and I would take however many books they would allow me. And by the time they got to know me, I was taking 20 books home a week. I would have this big bag and I would carry my books home, and I would take my books and I would read them, and I'd wait and wait and wait for the library. And the bookmobile allowed me to go to places so much more exciting and so much more interesting, and with people more exciting than me outside the little tiny world I lived in. The town itself was 15,000 people. So that gives you an idea, if you live so far, the bookmobile has to come, exactly what was around me. And so along that time, I decided I was going to become a writer. Then years later, we moved to Phoenix, Arizona for my husband to go to grad school. From Oregon, we moved. And we bought a house, built a house out in the middle of the desert. And again, we had one car. Back, it's hard to believe, but there was a time when families didn't have 2 cars and a car for every kid. There was like 1 car often in your family. So we had 1 car. And so the library was too far away for me to go with my toddler. So the bookmobile came out there to the edge of the desert again. So there I was going to the bookmobile again. And I have to tell you, I think there were maybe times that Gothics saved my toddler's life because I would get so stressed out, and the Gothics were there on the bookmobile for me. So the Gothics got me through my son's toddler years. So now I'm going to talk about my book. It's I didn't plan to write this book. I had another idea all in mind, but then this guy, Jackson Swan, popped up in my head, and he started talking in my head. And I went, no, I don't want to hear you. And I tell him to shut up, and he would go. And over the years, Jackson Swan would keep trying to talk to me. Now, if you know writers, you know that when we say that to each other, we think we're perfectly normal. If you say it out in the world, people might want to put you away for a while. But then one day, I have to back up. I never knew my father. My father deserted my mother when I was still a toddler, and so I never knew him. But I did know about his life because my great-grandfather would come and visit every once in a while, and I knew that he had married and had another family. So one day I found my sister, my half-sister, on Facebook. And I thought, oh, look at that. I wonder if that's my half-sister. So I sent her a little note, and I said, a little Facebook note. I said, did you, by the way, happen to know? And she named his name. I named his name, and she said, yes, he's my dad. Did you know him? And I thought, And I thought, well, yeah, he was my father too. And then there was absolute silence, total silence for like 2 or 3 days. And I thought, uh-oh, because I just assumed since I knew about her, she probably knew about me. Turns out she didn't. And when she went down and asked down the street and asked her mother, did dad have another family before our family? And the mother said, well, yes, he did. And she said, why didn't you ever tell us? And the mother said, and this line was so good, it actually made it into the book. The mother said, it never came up. And I mean, I still laugh at that line, because who in the world would ever bring up to your dad or your mother, did you ever have another family before our family? So as soon as I had that thing, that idea about sisters not knowing each other, then I started figuring out where Jackson was going to fit into the situation. And then I got to know Jackson better, and I wasn't planning to put him in the book. But the more I got to know Jackson, the more I knew that the story wasn't about 3 sisters. It was about 3 daughters. Now, each of them, one daughter, Tess, never knew her father or doesn't remember him. The other sister, the middle sister, knew him, but he was gone a lot. So he was her big hero, but he was gone a lot because he's a conflict photographer. And the third sister, and she didn't know about the first sister, and she didn't know about the third sister. The third sister was the one he actually made a family with, as much as he could make a family. And she knew about 2 others. So I thought, what would happen if I put them all together and just see what happens? And that's what I did. And so since Jackson is the key to my story, I'm going to read just a little bit about Jackson. I will hold up. Ta-da. I love this cover they gave me. I just love this cover. Okay. Aberdeen, Oregon. Conflict photographer Jackson Swan had traveled to dark and deadly places in the world most people would never see, nor want to. Along with dodging bullets and mortars, he'd survived a helicopter crash in Afghanistan, gotten shot mere inches from his heart in Niger, and been stung by a death stalker scorpion while embedded with the French Foreign Legion in Mali. Some of those who'd worked with him over the decades had called him reckless, rash, dangerous. Over late night beers or whatever else passed as liquor in whatever country they'd all swarmed to, other photographers and foreign journalists would argue about whether that bastard Jackson Swan had a death wish or would merely considered himself invincible. He did, after all, rush into high-octane situations no sane person would ever consider. And even when the shit hit the fan, somehow he'd come out alive and be on the move again, chasing the next war or crisis like a drug addict chased a high. The truth was that Jack had never believed himself to be immortal. Still, as he looked out over the peaceful view of rolling hills, the cherry trees wearing their spring profusion of pink blossoms, and acres of vineyards, he found it ironic that having evaded the Grim Reaper so many times over so many decades, it was an aggressive and rapidly spreading lung cancer that was going to kill him. Which was why he was here, sitting on the terraced patio of Chateau de Madeleine, the towering gray stone house that his father, Robert Swan, had built for his beloved war bride, Madeleine, to ease her homelessness. Oregon's Willamette Valley was a beautiful place, but it was not Madeleine's childhood home in France's Burgundy region where much of her family still lived. Family. Jack understood that to many, the American dream featured a cookie-cutter suburban house, a green lawn you had to mow every weekend, a white picket fence, happy, well-fed kids, and a mutt who would greet him with unrestrained canine glee whenever he returned from work. It wasn't a bad dream, but it wasn't and never could be his dream. Jackson is a very flawed character. Jackson has been all over the world and seen so many things that he's a very wounded character, and he can't fit into the role of a father and a husband. That's when I got to understand him and realize that I wanted to tell a little bit of his story as well. And each of the sisters sees Jackson through her own prism and how she knew him. And by that, I think we all get to know Jackson a little bit better. And anybody that's been watching TV the past few days, I can't believe that you don't watch those reporters that are out in the middle of all this. And think about if you saw the things they're seeing all your life, that was your job, and every day you went out to a new terrible place and saw new terrible things, that would have an effect on you. And it did with Jackson. So I'm not going to stand up for him and say he was a great dad, but he did what he thought he was doing. He was showing the truth to the world, and that was important to him. So now, because I spent 13 years in East Tennessee, and we would go to the Florida and South Carolina beaches. And I have to admit that to me, they were a very strange place. I grew up in the Northwest, where we have sea stacks, which are broken off pieces of the land that stick out like mountains out in the middle of the water. We have big piles of driftwood logs all over the beach. We have kelp all over the beach. My husband's grandmother's house fell off the cliff into the ocean. Fortunately, she had passed on and wasn't living there anymore, but it had fallen in the ocean because the winds and the waves are so wild in the upper Pacific. That's not well named because there's nothing peaceful about it. They carve away the land. So to me, those were beaches. If you don't have to wear a slicker on the beach in June, it's not a real beach. So I saw all those miles of beautiful sand, all that bathtub warm water, all that nice thing. And I thought, this is really nice, but it's not a beach. So when I realized I was talking, I understand it really is a beach, and it's a beautiful beach. And we spent 6 weeks a year, 3 in March and 3 in September, all along that coastline. So it is beautiful. But it got me thinking that people reading this book can kind of picture, I try to explain what it looks like, but it's hard to imagine the same way I had never thought about, your East Coast beach. So I brought a couple pictures. This is what Jackson can see from his terrace. That's a bit of the vineyard, and that's Mount Hood in the background. And then this is the vineyards. And again, the mountains. And this bit, the picture of Mount Hood, where I live now, I can see Mount Rainier from our house, which looks pretty much like Mount Hood because they're all they're all volcanic mountains. And there's days it makes its own weather. It's so high and it's so strong, it makes its own weather. And you won't be able to see it. And in the book, when it says the mountain is out, that means, oh, look, the mountain is out, because, you'll have weather days where it makes its own rain, makes its own clouds, it makes its own cloud, and it hides itself. And then you're driving along or you look up and, oh, there right in front of you is this huge mountain because the mountain has come out. So when you hear that in the book, that's what happens. All of a sudden, the mountain decides just to show herself and the mountain comes out. So that's part of the book. And the sisters were interesting to me. I was really, I was interested in all of them. I thought with Tess, I was going to start out with her story, and she was going to be the main sister, and because she was the first sister and the eldest. And there's a funny thing in there. A lot of you might be reading it and you'll think, oh, she's going to end up with Donovan, because there's a place in there that Donovan comes to tell her about, that she inherited a third of this winery, that she has this inheritance. And she has this real chemistry with him because she doesn't like him. And they have all this chemistry. And I was writing and I was just screaming at them. I said, no, you can't have this chemistry with him because you're not supposed to end up with him. And this is how, another thing, I'm a writer who doesn't plot my books very much. I know a beginning, what I call muddle. That's where I have to figure things out later, and an end. But I never exactly know. I just create characters and let them lead me. In this book, I really had time to get to know the characters because I told my editor and publisher the story over dinner in the summer of 2018. And they all went, "That's a great story." And that's all I could tell them, just about what I've told you now. And then it was really strange. A couple months later, I started having these pains, and I went in to the doctor, and he said, "Oh, you have arthritis. Your arthritis is getting worse." And I said, "I don't have arthritis." And he said, "Yes, your arthritis is getting worse." He did an x-ray. And so he said, "Go to physical therapy." So I went to physical therapy, and I kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I thought, oh, I have to go to physical therapy before he'll believe that I'm not getting better. So then I went to an orthopedic surgeon, and I had this rare disease that only 15,000 people a year get. And it cuts off the blood supply to your bones, and it kills your bones. So on March 19th, I had my first surgery, and I had 8 surgeries from March 19th to February of 2019 to February of 2018. And I spent 66 days in the hospital and had 3 months at home on IV surgery, IV antibiotics, because I got 2 superbugs that were trying to kill me from the hospital during the surgeries. So I had plenty of time to think about this book because I couldn't be writing then. So I had a year and a half, which is longer than I've ever had, to do nothing but research and think about this book. Meanwhile, this struck me as kind of funny. When I came up with the idea, there weren't a million World War II books out there yet, because I thought, oh, look, you have this brand new idea, you're going to have a World War II book. But I spent so much time not able to read, not able to write, and then so much time reading other people's books, I started seeing, oh no, all these World War II books are coming out. And there's a funny thing that writers will tell you, and it's the same with TV writers. It doesn't matter if you're book writers, TV writers, whatever. The ideas float in the air. There's a word for it, I can't remember now, but they're out there floating in the air, and somehow everybody picks up on them at the same time. That's how you see all of a sudden new seasons, you'll see 2 or 3 hospital shows, or all of a sudden you'll see 2 or 3 cop shows. Those people didn't steal those ideas from each other. They just kind of picked up those ideas that were floating in the air. And we don't know how it happened, but if you're a writer, you will know that's how it happens. And so that's how it happened with me. And unfortunately, while I was laying around doing my own lockdown, lots of other people grabbed onto those ideas. And I've read some of the books. Some I had to stop reading because I went, oh no, this person's read the same research books I've read. And I didn't want to see if anything was the same in my book, so I stopped reading the books. But I love the story. I love Madeline. Madeline, I originally intended to have the 3 daughters find her journals and read about her World War II experiences in the journals. She was a member of the French ski team, and she's a very brave woman. And when the war breaks out on the evacuation of Paris, when everybody's escaping Paris, when the Germans come into Paris, she's 13 and she's just getting her first pair of almost high heels and getting ready to go to the Harvest Ball. So the story continues over her innocence at 13 and her loss of innocence the day all the people fleeing Paris, hundreds of thousands of people kept stopping by their winery, begging for food and water and shelter as the Germans were coming in. So that was her first view of war. And then later on, she has an uncle who's hanged in the square for cheating with his wine, selling the Germans an inferior wine and putting his fancy labels on them. And that's when she decides to become a member of the resistance. And she has many, many adventures during the resistance. And when I first came up with the idea, I thought, well, I'm just going to have the sisters read the journals. And I know we've all read books where somebody finds a journal and that's how they learn about a relative's or a past person's former life. But I decided I wanted Madeline to still be alive for this book because she became, the more I thought about her all those months lying around with nothing to do, not able to write yet because I was on partly drugs and not feeling well at all, but plenty of time to think about her. And I got to know her very well too. And I thought, Madeline deserves, I can't kill Madeline. I said, readers will kill me if I kill Madeline after I give her their story. So I thought, that's great. I love Madeline. I'll keep Madeline alive. And then I turned the book into the publisher, and I wanted to put Madeline's points of view in, and do flashbacks. And I thought, I already have so many characters in this book. I think I better be careful. So I just had her telling the stories. And my editor sent it back and said, you know what would be really nice if we got to see more about Madeline and her husband and how they built the Swan family. And I said, oh, perfect, because those were the scenes I'd cut out. So I managed, again, you're seeing a little bit how the process works with writers. And so I put them back in, and we go back and forth in that book between where Madeline goes ahead and joins the resistance. And she starts out just as a typist, and then she moves up to a courier, and then she starts being seriously in the French resistance. And I had so much fun writing her book. And I was thinking about it more the past few days, watching Ukraine. And I was thinking about how brave these people are. Because when I was writing Madeline, I read a lot of biographies about women, especially resistance members. And I could imagine it, I thought, but watching them now, I kind of really understand. And thinking if I was going to read something, I don't think so. I have written some other books. I'll let you know. I have a series set up here on the Washington Peninsula. It's a Honeymoon Harbor series, and I have that book coming out in June, so you can read that. And then others. Do we have any questions?
Yes, feel free to.
Yeah.
Anybody
wants to ask questions?
Type the question out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Hi.
Hi, my name is Esther.
Hi,
and,
Esther.
Hi. Have you book?
Oh, you have it.
Of course, I wouldn't go to a book session without reading the book, which I loved.
Thank you.
And I especially like the World War II. I read a lot of novels and nonfiction about World War II. And I'm glad you mentioned how your viewpoint sort of was touched upon and grew actually over the should I say current events of the horrible world these days. Do you think that your book would have changed in any way if this had happened before? Would it have increased your understanding of what people go through and the amazing heroism of these people putting their bodies in front of convoys and tanks?
I think there would be two things about that. I think I would know it more because you can read a lot, and you can read the old film, the old reels from the things. And I'm old enough to remember going to Saturday matinees and seeing Movie Tone News, which was how we used to get our news. And I'm old enough to remember the Russian tanks coming into Hungary, seeing that up on the big TV screen. So I had a little bit of those thoughts as I'm having now, of course, the same thing. But you're granted, I would have known it much more internally. On the other hand, I don't know if I would have switched stories, because I think if I was writing it now, I might feel that I was taking advantage and taking their stories that, like you said, they're horrific. Their bravery is unbelievable. The grandmas learning how to shoot guns. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And and she actually has to learn to shoot a gun in this book, and she uses it. And which, if you see her when she's 13, shopping with her mama to buy clothes for the harvest ball and hoping the boy will kiss her, give her the first kiss, the boy from the neighboring vineyard. She goes from there to a woman who will use a gun to shoot someone. And it's not gradual, it continues over. But if I were to thinking about writing that book now, I think I would feel guilty. I grew up Irish Catholic. Guilt is, automatic in us. It is. I think I feel guilty.
Don't worry, Jewish mamas know how to inflict guilt also.
Oh, my mother's an Irish, a first generation Irish person who grew up in a German neighborhood on Long Island. I got a German Jewish neighborhood in Long Island. So hey, my mom was the West Coast distributor of guilt. So I know what you're talking about. And so I think that I might feel that I was actually using their pain to tell my story. And because it's so current, I don't know if I could have written it now. I think I probably would have changed and found a different story, maybe.
Well, I'm glad you wrote this.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And that's wonderful that you go and you buy a book if you're going to do the book club thing.
Yes.
That's
And
good.
when can we expect another book?
Well, as I said, this actually isn't my first women's fiction. I'd written women's fiction for other publishers before. But the next one coming out is more of a romance. But all my books, that's a funny thing. I've never written straight romance. All my books going back to the 80s have had social issues in them, which makes me kind of a hybrid writer. The book I have coming out now is one of my characters that I loved, and I've been trying to get him into a book for the longest time. He's on the autism spectrum. He's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant young man. And we have some people on the spectrum in our family, so I kind of understand it. And he's brilliant, but he lacks social skills. And he's determined, he runs this farm that's in the series. And he has this woman that is assigned for her marketing class to figure out what better ways to market him online. And he finds himself falling in love with it, but he doesn't know how to do it. And he's watching all the Hallmark movies and he's studying all this and everything. And he's trying to learn and he can understand it, but he can't figure out how to do it and get his nerves because she's so pretty and she's so bright and she's so cheery. And he feels all this, but he doesn't know how to feel it because he's, brilliant, but that's not his thing. So as in small town books, and this is what I like writing about small town books. In small town books, everybody gets together and helps him out get ready for his date. And it's the getting ready for the date and teaching him what to say. And they decide to do a triple date at the movies because as the other guys tell him, they say, look, he comes for advice. They say, look, here's what you do. The first date, you can go to a movie and dinner. He said, that's a common thing people have been doing forever. That way you have 2 hours, you don't have to talk to her. And then we'll all go out to dinner and we'll keep the conversation going for you, don't worry. And the beautician gives him a haircut and makes him look like a Bieber, gives him a Bieber haircut and everybody's getting him, they get him dressed right and everything. And I had so much fun reading that book. And also it was as much fun as I had writing it, it also dealt with the fact that how if you're different. And as I said, I always have put social issues into my books because quite honestly, when I started writing romance, I didn't know how to write a romance. I just wrote my stories and they sold. And back then, the only contemporary writers you could sell were usually men. When I started writing in 1982, men were all the authors. So I started writing the stories I wanted to tell. But there weren't any publishers buying those stories in those days. They were buying books by men, usually about women, but they were still books written by men. And so there wasn't any way to break in. And romance was a great way for me to tell my stories. And I was lucky. People let me tell my stories. I had one editor say, you're the only romance writer I have who has a family, who has family members in her books. And I said, this is when I was still, 30. And I said, I love grandmas, now I like grandmas, grandma of grown children, grandchildren, actually. And so I've always written social issues, families, things like that. If you go back, granted, in my 80s books, I think you'll find a strong strain of feminism in it that I might not be so heavy on these days, but that was the 70s and 80s.
They list a few books here from the Honeymoon Harbor.
Yeah, those are the books set on the on the peninsula. It's on the Olympic Peninsula on the very top part of Washington. It's outside the whole rainforest, national park.
Beautiful area.
It is. I named it that because I was running out of names. I'd had a shelter-based series set on the Oregon coast where my husband proposed to me. And he bought me a bag of taffy at the taffy store. And then we walked across the street to the seawall and we were watching the whales that live there and eating my taffy. And that's where he proposed to me when I was 18 and he was 21. And so my series, the shelter-based series, is set there. And that was all guys returning home from the war, because I'd written some military romances and I had these guys left over. And his two nephews were flying in the Iraq War. They were flying medevac. And once they started getting, again, this is how things affect me when I write. When they started flying medevac helicopters in the Afghan mountains, the same place I was setting my books, I got Irish superstitious, I think, or writer superstitious. We all know, we're all afraid if you write about something, it will happen. I know somebody who wrote about a character getting, attacked by a bear, and 2 months later, her son was hiking on the Appalachian Trail, and all of a sudden a bear came out, and so we go, no, don't write that. And so I went up to New York and I told them I can't write those books anymore. And they said, well, they're making the Times, they're doing well. And I said, I don't care. I said, my husband has two nephews flying in those mountains. I said, I can't write their stories anymore because it's just too scary. So I'd written small town books and family stories before, but they got killed off by vampire books and serial killer books. And so that this 10-year period, that's all publishers were buying. And I didn't want to write vampires, so I wrote serial killers. But I put them in a military scenario because at the same time, I was making greeting cards for soldiers, deployed soldiers in the war, to send back home to their families.
Wow.
And I belonged to Operation Right Home, and we had members all over the world. And during the Iraq War, we sent over 3 million cards. And it wasn't cards to soldiers, it was blank inside cards. So the soldiers could send the cards back home to their family. And it made it easy. They didn't have to write whole letters. They just had to scribble a little note inside the card and send it back. So the military guys were all on my mind. So I just put military guys and serial killers together. But then I went and I told them, I said, I want to write small town books. And there were only 2 writers writing small town books at the time. And they said, we don't see the numbers. And I said, well, you don't see the numbers because you're not putting books out. And so let me write my stories again. And I said, I want to write my stories again. So that's when I started my shelter-based series. And then when I moved publishers, I'd gone, I think, 8 books, and then I was kind of done with everybody, and waved goodbye to them and moved on and moved up the coast to closer to where I live now, on the Olympic Peninsula. And the Honeymoon Harbor came about because I had to come up with a name. I'd run out of names, and now there are so many small town books out there. Every time I came up with, oh, I'll do this, and oh, somebody's already got that name. I'll do this. And my husband swears there's not a place on the Oregon-Washington coast that you can land that there's not a small town book series in there. In
This
fact,
cove, that cove. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And bay, and yes, all that. And I actually had 2 readers move from back east and actually move to the Washington and the Oregon coast because of Shelter Bay, which I thought was kind of amazing, but hey, I'm glad they're happy. But so Honeymoon Harbor, I came up with the idea that I read about, Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt had declared the peninsula, a whole bunch of the peninsula, a national preserve. And then his cousin Franklin came and made it a national park. And we go all there all the time. It's a beautiful place. It's got the high mountains, but it's also got a rainforest, like a real wonderful, beautiful rainforest. And so I thought, well, I'll put the book up there. And I thought, what if, and I had written a little, like, I don't know, 5 books set in this place that's really Monaco, but I made it a different place. I made it Montecroy. And I'd played with the royal family of Montecroy over a few books. I wrote one Cinderella book where instead of the prince, first of all, the 2 sisters were actually nice stepsisters. And they were all back on the road as country singers, singing to pay off their dad's taxes because he got cheated by his accountant. And so they were on the road, and they go to Montecroy to perform for the prince. And people are trying to assassinate the prince because, you can only become the king if you have a child, right? And so they want to get rid of the prince. And it's a flip on the Cinderella story, because in this book, she saves the prince from the assassins. So I had this town, this country I'd invented, Montecroy, years ago in the 90s. And I thought, what if the king and queen of Montecroy get married and they go, and this is the town where it is in real life was supposed to be the capital of Washington. It was the richest town in Washington. It had gold, it had silver, it had all sorts of wonderful things, and it was a fort. And it was supposed to be the capital. This is true life now. My husband always says, "Are we talking about your book or real life?" Okay, so it gets confusing. But anyway, so the trains go up there, and the idea was the train would go up there and it would be the capital, because it was a big seaport there. All the ships would come in. But then there was a recession and everybody left the town. Now it's an art community mostly. And I've used this town before. I move it around the peninsula and change its name from time to time, but I love this town. So anyway, I had them come to this town for their honeymoon because Teddy Roosevelt says, you need to really go see this town. You need to see this beautiful land. So the king and queen of Montecroy on their honeymoon come to this town, which, is my honeymoon. That's why it changed its name to Honeymoon Harbor, because it thought it would get some more business and some publicity and some tourism. So back in the 1800s, they changed their name to Honeymoon Harbor. And that's how it became Honeymoon Harbor. Wow. But that was fun. That was fun reading. I put Teddy in there, and I put Franklin in there, and I just put the whole kitchen sink in there. But I enjoy writing the series books. This was wonderful to write. Then I said goodbye to everybody. The series books are fun because you can kind of put in a bunch of people, and then you can tell their stories, and you can build the story of the town as you get to meet all the people. Like John, I had John, my farmer. Well, he's a farmer, but he's a brilliant botanist. I had him. I tried to put him in two different books, but the books ran long, so I had to keep pulling John out. And then finally, I had this book, and I went, okay, I'm starting with John this time. The John is getting in this book, and I had more fun writing a story. But as I said, it also, the message, I always have a theme in my books, and the theme in this book, the inheritance, what everyone will realize, I think, and I hope you did at the end of the book, that the inheritance wasn't the vineyard at all. The inheritance was the family, the connections and the bravery that born this family. I hope you kind of got that was the real inheritance, not the winery at all. And right. So the theme with John that I've been wanting to write for a long time, and it's becoming, I think, even more important these days. Maybe it's just social media or something, about how we view the other. and how somebody like John or somebody that's different than us might be viewed. And so I played with that a little bit. It's not a pound your message book. I don't write those. But if I pick a theme and then I write on the theme.
May I ask you? May I?
Yes, hi.
Good afternoon. I really enjoyed that book. How do you do the research? Do you have people that help you with the research, or you do it yourself? For example, on Madeline, the war, the Second World War, and what happened in France and the way the Germans marched in, etc. You did the research, or you know people that can tell you about it?
I know very little about that war. My father was, my stepfather was sailor, so he wasn't involved in that war. I read probably, and this is probably a lesser number, at least 50 biographies, autobiographies, and histories. And as I said, in a way I was lucky because I had that extra year that I couldn't write, so I was able to do nothing. I couldn't write, but I could read. I had little spots in my brain from all the surgeries. I had to learn to reconnect my words again. If you do 8 surgeries over like a 10-month period of time, it kind of screws up. It kind of screws up your brain. And the surgeries were 6 to 8 hour surgeries. So it was a long time under anesthetic over that year. And so it took me a while to get my words back. As you can tell, I got them back. But I read stats. I didn't have stats. I had a Kindle. I kept downloading and downloading and downloading. And many of those instances, like the hanging in the square and the plane crash, things like that. Many of those instances. Oh, and the walling up of the cave.
Right.
That actually, I read. A family did that. They walled up the cave, and there were so many other things that I wanted to put in, but I didn't have room for it. But yeah, I read an awful lot of books, and I have enough of an imagination. I can kind of put myself in people's shoes a little bit, and I kind of can feel how I would felt. One of the things that was lucky on that book, you read the book, but the audio book, I was kind of nervous when I realized, well, this book's coming out in audio, and I was going to have 2 French people and 1 Southerner. And those are accents that people screw up so often. But I found that my publisher gave me a list of names, and they said, try these out and see if any of you like any of them. And one of them was perfect. First of all, she's an actress, a stage actress, and she's done some TV, but mostly stage. Second of all, she lives in Atlanta, so she knows how to talk like somebody from Charleston would know. And then she spent a year studying in Paris, and bingo. And so so I actually, lots of times I don't listen to my audiobooks because the voices don't sound like the voices in my head, but I listened to those, and boy, she was good, and I was so happy with it. So I was able to listen to that. But yeah, I'm one of those people, little girls, I started reading at 3, and I just read and read and read. When I was 7, I wrote my first story. It was about I learned mallards mate for life. And it was so I had 2, we were on the Oregon Flyway. So all the geese and ducks flew over our house in the fall and the spring. And I had 2 mallards, and the hunters shot the mom mallard. So the dad was left a grieving widower, and he had to take care of the baby ducklings. And it went on for chapters and chapters and chapters of the mom duck dying. She did not fly quickly into that wetland in the sky. It was very dramatic. And so it was 2nd grade writing assignment, and I got a gold star. And I thought, well, this is really, really cool. I think I'll be a writer when I grow up. But that's how it started. It worked, yeah. Now my books have happy endings, though. That's why I say, I think you would have been mad at me if I killed Madeline, wouldn't you?
I liked the way it turned out. I liked the whole book. I thought it was very interesting and well written. So that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'm a big reader, and I've read lots of things, and I certainly enjoyed your book.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed writing every minute of it. I enjoyed writing. I love those people. I loved everyone. Came to love them more and more as I got to know them, because you never know about somebody. Madeline surprised me actually with the gun scene. I did not expect to write that. I did not expect to write that. She just kind of took over and did it.
People do what they need to do at the time it's necessary. You somehow
That's true.
find the backbone to do what you have to.
That's how I think that shows how alive they come for me, that she surprised me with that. I was just riding along and all of a sudden there it was.
You mentioned, I may have missed, you mentioned all these surgeries. What happened to you?
Oh, I had a vascular necrosis I got, and it's a disease. Only 15,000 people in the country get it a year. It cuts off the blood supply to your hip. So I had everything that could go wrong did. Every surgery that could go wrong went wrong. And they kept it, and then I got these 2 superbug infections. And so I had 14, it was 14 weeks of 3 times a day at home antibiotics and 66 days in the hospital. And I couldn't put my right leg down for 8.5 months.
Oh,
And I still don't have a hip. I'm just hooked together with a plate and some wires. So I still don't have a hip. But it was just my reconstruction surgeon does workshops and lectures all over the world. And he goes around and he told me one time, I think we were at surgery 6 maybe. And he said, he said, I tell people, when they say, what's your worst case? And he said, I always tell them about you. And and he said, nobody can believe it. And they always say, how did this happen? And he told me, I just came up with God hates us.
Well, you sure seem fine now. Are you able to, are you as mobile as you need to be?
I'm walker and wheelchair, and I can walk. I had gotten so I could hop on my left leg 68 steps across the room, but with a walker. Okay, with a walker. But now I'm mostly walker and wheelchair. Yeah. And I used to be a hiker, all these mountains and everything I'm showing you. Did you see the pictures? Here's here's this one.
Oh,
that's what they see.
Beautiful.
And then that's the vineyard too.
Oh.
So at the risk of being a groupie, we have conversed on Facebook. I'm the one that works at a hospital. I don't know if you remember.
We have.
Yeah. But at the risk of sounding like a groupie, I counted just before this. I have 54 of your books.
Oh,
Wow.
I love them all. Yeah, no.
Thank
And
you.
I have a relative who lives in Spokane, Washington, so I've been to the West Coast several times. But one trip I do want to make is down, starting in Seattle, but going down to the Oregon coast. So, because I've never done that.
I love
There's
both
so many-
places. I love Oregon and Washington, but I will admit, Oregon has the best beaches, best coast.
That's where I want to go. So actually, I might want to come to you because we're trying to figure out, I can only go like in the spring or the late or the early fall, but
up here, when we lived in Arizona in the desert, my husband, we would come up the last week of August and the first 2 weeks of September, because those are our glorious weeks.
Oh, good. I've been to Seattle and Spokane. I can't say I'm crazy. I think it's grown on me because my brother's been there for 40 years. But Seattle, I love Seattle and in summer. But that's perfect. That's exactly when I wanted to look.
That's the perfect time to come. Perfect.
I've been to in the late spring. I was at Mount Rainier, and I have pictures that look like kind of, you remember color forms back years ago. It was a clear, like you were saying, the clouds. Because one time I went to Mount Rainier and you could hardly see it. And then another time it was clear. But as far as your books, I have to say one thing, because this is a pet peeve of mine. I do read a lot of romance, but I like, like yours are you, and there's certain other authors, and there's quite a few authors in your area that I read.
Yes.
And I love that area. But
You
one
write
of the
a
things,
lot when the rain keeps you indoors.
yeah. But one of the things I do appreciate about your books, because not every author is good at this, and I have a knack for finding it, is when you have a series, making sure that you have that continuity and don't make mistakes that contradict the book before.
Well, okay, I will tell you, I made a mistake with the name. A secondary character's name did change in the books. I will admit that.
Yeah, I actually caught that in another author's book, and I emailed her. The book now maybe, and I read the Honeymoon, the Harbor a while back. The one is this a brother of? Aren't there Isn't the stories all about the brothers?
Yeah, well, the one is the sister. Brianna is the first one.
Yeah.
Brianna's death in Heron's Landing. And then, and then the next one is Aiden.
Mhm.
And then, let's see, what did we just have? Gabe. And the one that's coming out June 28th is Burke, the football
Oh,
player.
Burke. Okay, that is.
And Quinn's book I'm working on now.
Okay, so Burke is the one you're talking about that has the autism.
Yes,
Ah, okay. Yeah, I'm waiting for that book, but anyway.
yeah, I'm really excited about that. I'm really pleased with how it came out. I love everybody, but and Burke ends up with Lily, Lily, the rich person that works at the community college. And yeah, she has a big dark secret. She broke up with him by text as she left New York.
Okay. But I love, but even I have some of your very old books, and I really love them.
Oh,
Like,
thank you.
if anybody else, I mean, even if they're some books, if they're a good story, it doesn't matter that they're kind of outdated from an era, like the 70s or 80s. It's kind of funny to
yeah,
read
looking
books.
things up in the yellow pages. Needing money for the payphone. Then we move into faxes.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I highly recommend your books.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So
That's
I'm glad I
lovely to
talked to you
hear.
then.
Yeah,
I'm glad I
talked
checked about
about
the trip advice.
Yeah, you were with me through all my surgeries on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the time.
Yeah.
Everybody kept saying, when I was all those days in the hospital, everybody kept saying, so now you're going to write about a hospital book, right? And I said, are you kidding me? I don't think so. Don't want to live it. But anyway, so thank you for coming and dropping in and talking. Thank you. And thank you for buying the books. That makes me so happy.
Oh, yeah.
You helped put my kid through college.
I think I helped put a lot of people's kids in college. I have
Our pleasure.
I have
Thank
a
you.
library in my house. I have a room. It's a library. So.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, it's good to see you in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've often wondered whether authors respond to people who email them, and I gather from their conversation you do.
I do. Right now, while I was in the hospital, I didn't, Google decided I didn't exist. My website, my email used to be joanne@joanneross.com. And now Google refused to believe that person ever existed. And I came home and I fought for months with Google, and there's no person at Google. And so I finally had to go to JoAnnRoss@iCloud.com. And that's so if you go to my website, you can, if you go to my website and you email, it will go to Joanne Ross. It won't go to JoAnnRoss.com anymore. But yeah, I lost mail, I think, during that period of time, because anybody that sent to Joanne Ross from the whole time I was in the hospital, anybody that sent to Joanne Ross that mail, it didn't exist anymore because somehow it went away. So I don't know how that happened, but anyway, yes, I do. Sometimes it takes some time. I'm also doing that thing now. If I make cards, I don't know if you heard that I made cards for soldiers. I make greeting cards now for hospitalized kids and friends and everybody. So readers, if they send me to the Joanne Ross at iCloud.com, Joanne Ross at iCloud.com, yeah. And they just put card. I don't know when it will happen because I make them in between books and when I have time, but I'm sending people now homemade cards that I make.
Oh, isn't that nice? How long does it take you to write a book on average?
On average, books like this, and as I said, I used to write quite a few, and for different publishers. That book will take me about 9 months.
Oh,
One of my shorter books, 9 months to 11 months, somewhere in there. And the books that I write, when I was younger, I wrote faster. Now I think I can write a book faster, but I hold out for 6 months because I want time to get it how I want it.
well, this one was good.
Thank you.
You got
Thank
it
you,
right.
Steve. Thank you. I'm really glad you thought so.
Hello,
Well, this has been fun.
hello.
I'd like to thank you for giving us a talk.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah,
Thank
Yes,
you.
it's done.
I might come to you for travel advice when I finally can plan my
Oh,
trip.
do, please do. I will tell you, yes. You
Okay.
have to go, when you go down the Oregon coast, go to Depot Bay. The taffy store's there, still there. And then you can watch the whales.
Oh, okay, that sounds cool. Thank you.
We go down there and I tell them that, that was 53 years ago, we got married. And I tell them that my marriage may depend on that taffy store staying open. So they can't close.
Oh, my
Because
goodness.
the taffy store is still there.
Oh,
Oh, that's wonderful. JoAnn, thank you so much for being here. And,
Well, thank you.
I'm glad you got to have a fairly informal conversation with everyone here. It sounds like everyone that's had a chance to read your work really enjoyed it. If you're on today and you haven't read it, you can grab copies from our library. Sounds like a good book.
Thank you.
very good.
Yeah.
If I'm ever out in the Pacific Northwest, I'm going to make sure to get your tour too.
Yeah, get in touch with me and I will give you a tour. Yes, I will give you all the places that you need to see. We have 15 in the whole rainforest, 15 of the world's largest trees.
Wow.
So right within just a little height of each other. So see, you need to come.
Very cool.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you're able to join us, and we'll be in touch soon, and hopefully maybe one day we can get you here in person if you're up for the bigger trip.
That would be cool. That would be cool. Oh, I could figure it out. Thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Enjoy your weekends.